Jennifer Whitmore.
Minister, when the COVID crisis hit, countries all over the world very quickly realised the seriousness of the situation and the potential crisis that was being faced. Governments responded quickly, politicians worked together to agree measures that were based on science and on the evidence of experts, and our public sector and communities worked tirelessly to form a safety net around the most vulnerable. We demonstrated that together we could face down this enormous challenge. The response was not perfect, and there will be lessons to be learned, but I am reminded of something that Dr. Mike Ryan from the World Health Organization said, and that was, perfection is the enemy of the good when it comes to emergency management. Speed trumps perfection. Unfortunately, Minister, when it comes to the climate and biodiversity crisis that we face here in Ireland, we are seeing neither speed nor perfection. Instead, climate action in this country has amounted to an endless stream of reports, reviews and plans. Unfortunately, there are very, very few results. Where there's been legislation, it has been weak on targets. Where there's been gaps, these have been filled with policies and plans. And where we've had policies and plans, we have had very little oversight or accountability over their implementation. And not surprisingly, this has led to very few results in the 5 years since climate action was first legislated for. Take, for example, the 2014 National Policy Position and the 2017 National Mitigation Plan, both of which were wholly unambitious. They've been now superseded by commitments in the Government's Climate Action Plan. However, this plan has never been put on a statutory footing and is not linked to the ongoing preparation of the National Mitigation Plan or long-term strategy. Soon there will be a National Energy and Climate Plan under the EU Clean Energy Package, which will produce yet another separate climate strategy whose statutory basis is in EU law, not national. We have been left with a web of disjointed and incoherent policies. And I think, going through these documents, your head will actually spin at the different streams, the number of documents. And while some of them are ambitious, the actions really aren't following through on them. Good climate action policy requires good legislation. And without that legislation, policies and plans will merely amount to pure rhetoric and a sluggish approach to climate change. It will not amount to the sense of urgency that we require at this point in time. Strong, target-driven legislation will be the central driver in the delivery of our national and international climate action obligations. But we remain without this for the time being. The Climate Action Amendment Bill has been left in limbo and would have provided a robust framework reinforced by 5 yearly carbon budgets, setting out key sectoral targets and providing the Oireachtas with oversight and the powers it requires. Yet for the 5th year in a row, we are participating in another annual transition statement without the implementation of effective legislation in place. This is, in essence, our environmental Groundhog Day. We need strong, target-driven legislation to be implemented, which is backed by science to help us achieve both our climate action and our biodiversity objectives. And yes, biodiversity absolutely needs to be included in these discussions and the discussions that we're having today. I don't think we should be talking about climate crisis without also referencing the biodiversity crisis that we face. And I welcome the fact that this chamber last year declared a climate and a biodiversity crisis, but we now need to move on that. The two major issues are intertwined and they cannot be dealt with independently of each other. We need policy and legislative coherence on this matter. The transition statement referenced biodiversity, but it was very weak and minimal in what it stated about it. And when you go to the Climate Action Plan, in all the actions in the Climate Action Plan, biodiversity is not referenced once. There's some discussion about green schools, some discussion about agriculture, but there really isn't the focus on biodiversity that we actually need. And I think the fact that despite there even being, I know there is a sectoral adaptation plan for biodiversity under the transition plan, but we will not have the opportunity to discuss this with the Minister for Heritage today. And I think that is a big gap in the transition statements that we and discussions that we're having here today. And I think it demonstrates that really biodiversity it's not been taken seriously when we're looking at climate action. Biodiversity and nature-based solutions are key to addressing climate change adaptation and mitigation and allowing nature to be the solution when it comes to a multitude of challenges that will be faced. They provide carbon storage potential, flood management, soil stability, water management, erosion reduction. They're just few of the value and the benefits that we can get from using nature to address climate change. And then, of course, we will also have the biodiversity benefits. So it's really a win-win for the environment. For example, over the last few days, we've seen it reported that seagrasses are 30 times more efficient at capturing and storing carbon than tropical forests. Yet we don't have a full picture and understanding of where our seagrass populations are, what the full extent of them is. We certainly don't have management plans in place for them, and we don't afford them any protections through marine national parks or no-take zones. And this is only one example. There is a multitude of examples across our natural world where we should really be putting our focus into protecting and enhancing, and nature in turn will help us address the climate change problems that we face. We need to take nature seriously when it comes to climate change. And it is unfortunate the Minister for Heritage is not here today to be part of that discussion. But I suppose my first question to you, Minister, is will you commit to incorporate nature-based solutions and biodiversity measures in all the climate change adaptation and mitigation plans, policy and legislation as we go forward? I think that's really important, that we have that commitment and that we strive to do that. I have another question just in relation to the funding for these measures, because we do have a lot of plans and policies, in relation to what happens at a local level. I know the local councils have been heavily involved in developing mitigation plans and adaptation plans. They have their biodiversity officers in place, and they've worked with Caro on their climate action charter. There is a difficulty, though, Minister, in that there is no funding being attached to a lot of these programmes. So, this time last year I was with Clough County Council. Our local property tax had to pay for our climate officer. So if we expect, and I do think it is a good strategy to have local councils who are on the ground and at that coalface with local communities, developing climate change policies and driving them at a local level, we're going to have to fund it. Even simple things like the electric chargers that you referenced earlier on, the councils have to put in, I think it's 25% of the cost towards those. We're going into a very, very uncertain economic future where councils will find it difficult to perform their normal standard functions, and I think they will struggle to perform these additional climate change and biodiversity measures that we're asking of them. So, Minister, will you commit to fund councils additional funding to perform their climate change and biodiversity requirements? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome Deputy Whitmore's comments. I think you're absolutely right. We have not had the legislative framework that has allowed the focus on delivery. But I think this is the last time in this House that we will have the transition statements, and they are a legacy of the 2015 legislation. The new legislation, the general scheme of which was published in December, sets out the new approach, and that will be very much results oriented. As we discussed earlier, it has an implementation board in the Department of the Taoiseach, which is seeing that actions committed to are honoured. Not only that, we will have a very strong Oireachtas committee that will be overseeing targets on a ministerial basis, individual sectorally, not the sort of catch-all bulldog clip approach of one minister coming in and seeking to be accountable for the whole lot. So that legislation will be a powerful shift in the way in which we manage the climate challenge, and it reflects a lot of work starting from the Citizens' Assembly, the Oireachtas Committee on Climate, and the work of my own officials and across government. So, I think everyone recognises that we have not had the structures to implement the change. I think it's a little unfair to say we're making no progress. I think we have made progress even in the last 12 months. We see renewables on our grid significantly increasing. We see an increase in the penetration of electric vehicles. We do see energy use, and the carbon emissions from energy in 2019 is down by I think close to 2%, at a time when the economy still grew very significantly by 5.5%. So we are seeing some if you like, turning of the oil tanker, if you like to use that probably inappropriate phrase, you know, as we seek to get to grips with this challenge. But we have a huge distance to go. You're right, there is a separate biodiversity plan, and it wasn't included in the climate plan. It wasn't the remit, I suppose, of when I was putting this together. The climate plan was, the biodiversity plan was being developed elsewhere. You may be right that we need to integrate those in some way. That is a matter, I suppose, for future governments. But on the other hand, I think the approach that we're taking in legislation generally is to make line ministers responsible. So it's not that whoever is in this position as climate minister would be responding for transport and agriculture, but you would go to the line minister responsible.